Welcome back to Stranded in Pittsburgh. I can turn that music up a little bit more. It's Nick and it's Nate back once again to break down what has been an absolutely insane week of Pittsburgh sports. There's been some pretty optimistic highs, there's been some pretty unfortunate lows, and we were all ready to talk about it today. And then, right after we ironed out all the details, you already know where this is going if you've ever watched before. Ethan goes, I just got a ticket to the Penguins game. See you later. So it's going to be just Nate and I. But you know what? Maybe that's for the better at this point. We only really want team players here at Stranded Sports, Nate.
I didn't know there was what has he been traveling to see?
Oh, the Golden Corrals.
I didn't know there was one in PPG Paints Arena. But
wow.
I thought we were boycotting them for obvious reasons that we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, no, good to be back on without Ethan as always. It just seems to be you and I for the most part.
Yeah, he's gonna have to give Nate a little bump in that weekly paycheck. But anyway, a lot to dive into. As I mentioned, we're gonna start things off talking about Pitt. Won a big game today against Wake Forest. After that, we'll pivot into the Steelers discussion. A lot going on there. You don't need me to tell you about it. The center point will be about the Russell Wilson signing over everything else. Then we're gonna go to the Penguins, talk about the Jake Guentzel trade before wrapping it up with some of the Pirates spring training storylines. But first, we're going to jump right in with Pitt. Again, defeated Wake Forest today, 81-69. Leggett with 30 points, 7 rebounds. Blake Hinson contributed mightily with 20 points, 4 rebounds. This is a Wake Forest team that a few weeks ago beat Pitt 91-58. I can barely read my handwriting. I jotted that down so quick about a half hour ago. But yeah, that was a huge game in terms of, as we mentioned a few weeks ago on this very show, Pitt was getting some press about how good things were going and how they really turned around after the ice cold start they had to conference play. And then right as the national buzz started following them, they had that horrendous loss to the Demon Deacons there, and they respond well here in the quarters of the ACC tournament. Looks like, though, Nate, they're still going to need to beat North Carolina, the regular season ACC champions, if they want to for sure bid into that field of 64 or 68, whatever you prefer to clarify it as. But anyway, what did you make of today's game? And do you think it's kind of BS that some of the experts, we can air quote experts, no one really knows what they're talking about bracketology, just like the NFL draft. Do you think that it's fair that they're saying they need to win that game tomorrow against the Tar Heels?
I think it's fair because, looking at the bubble teams, there are some really tough teams that, and again, it's interesting because a lot of the reasonings have come down to, Pitt's out of conference schedule was very weak this year. And it was like in the 340s out of 360 teams. And looking at, your Texas A&Ms and some of the other teams had some really solid out of conference schedules. But I think it's going to have to come down to Pitt cannot lose more than like double digits. Like they really have to play it close and against North Carolina to really have a good chance. Obviously they win. I think that solidifies it. But the game against Wake Forest was like their last 2 weeks of the season in 40 minutes of basketball. You have this, great run early in the second half where you're up by 19 points, and then all of a sudden it's a one possession game with like 6-7 minutes left. That's just how it went. Because during the regular season, they were on that run where they were like, all right, we're looking good. You can't lose more than 2 games down the stretch, and they did to Clemson and Wake Forest, as you mentioned, with the 30-point loss at Wake Forest. But Pitt, they showed a lot of good stuff, for like 85% of that game. And then Wake Forest started to come back, and even without Efton Reed was in foul trouble with 4 fouls, and they still found a way to get back in there. Pitt just stopped shooting the ball. They just couldn't make it. And then Wake just was chipping away, started getting Pitt in some trouble, fouling, driving the lane. It was a really physical game, Nick. I don't know if you caught any of it because I know you're grinding yourself working, so I don't know how much you got a chance to catch it.
I saw an obscure clip here or there. Unfortunately, I didn't get to watch enough to really get the whole narrative or theme of the game.
Yeah, there was, it was like, you talk old Big East basketball. It was very similar, just very physical. Guys were putting their body on the line. Ish Leggett, he balled out. 30 points. He had a handful of huge steals that was the one thing that Pitt struggled with. They were turning the ball over, unforced errors, a couple handoffs that they just couldn't get off. But yeah, I mean, Ish Leggett just put on a show, man. I mean, he was getting into the lane, finishing. There was a couple where he could have gotten and ones, but they called him on the floor on the fouls. And Blake Hinson, you mentioned 20 points. Those were a quiet 20. He had a couple of big threes, like 2 or 3 of those, but like other than that, it was a pretty quiet game for him. But it was really Ish Leggett that really, I mean, got it rolling. And if Pitt can have one guy like that against North Carolina tomorrow, and then have the supporting cast do what Blake Hinson did and Carlton Carrington did and Jalen Lowe, even though he didn't have much of a high scoring game, he still contributes when he can. And he's a heck of a point guard for Pitt, which, is a really big thing right now. But I mean, I don't think it's BS that they're, not in right now and they have to win against North Carolina. I think if they keep it close, there's a really good chance because, I mean, it's top 10 team in the country, number one team in the bracket. Pitt only lost to them by like 9 or 10 during the regular season. So it's a team that Pitt could probably play pretty close too.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel if Pitt does keep it close, there's a good chance. I think beating Wake Forest definitely helps the cause, and that's nothing earth-shattering to say, but a team that beat them that badly during the regular season to come out and get a win like the one they had today, anything's going to help your cause when you're winning in a conference tournament, but you feel like that was a really important one against a team that had bested them by that kind of deficit earlier, and now they get a chance to play the regular season Kings, so definitely going to be a good case there, even if they keep it close. You never know, one of these other conferences, top seed loses or whatever, maybe they don't get as many bids from that conference like the A10 or similar conference. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Pitt here.
Absolutely. And I know, like right after the game, they showed Pitt was on that first four outline. They were like the second team, like ready to knock on the door, and then they since have jumped back down to I think the third. And some of the teams that were on, bubble watch that were in the last four in, like Kansas State was in there, they got bumped out, and they play Iowa State tonight, which is the seventh ranked team in the country. So Kansas State's season's pretty much done. I mean, unless they pull off a miraculous upset. Texas A&M as well was a team that was in or at least on that last four or whatever those lines are, last four out or first four out. That's what I'm trying to say. It's all confusing at this time of year, but yeah, I mean, Pitt could use some help. St. John's obviously, I think, is one to watch. That's kind of been like the cry, the calling card, the cry from the Pitt fans of like, why St. John's higher than Pitt? It's a Big East team, and they only have like 18, 19. They have 19 wins now. They won today, but they play UConn tomorrow. So like that's going to be a really tough game for them. And if they lose, and Pitt can at least keep it close with UNC. See, here's the thing: UConn blows out St. John's. Pitt loses by say 5 to North Carolina. I think you can flip those. I really do.
Yeah.
Especially again, and it's crazy to think about because Virginia's on the bubble. So that means there's only 2 ACC teams that are safely in the field, which is crazy because I don't know when the last time you could say that. I know last year, like Pitt was on the bubble, Clemson was talked about on the bubble, a couple other teams were on the bubble. But there was at least 3 or 4 safely in Miami, Duke, whoever it was. But like, when was the last time you could say the ACC like they're at a point where they can only have 2 teams in? Like, if Virginia loses tonight, who knows what happens to them? It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I saw Pitt went down in Lenardi's one rank
Yeah,
after,
yeah.
which was insane in his little magical last 4 out or first 4 out, excuse me. So we'll see. I'm a big advocate of no one knows what the hell they're talking about, but we'll we'll see, I guess, what happens. There's a lot to consider. But a win should pretty much conquer all tomorrow. So we will follow that and see what happens and probably have something witty to say on Twitter whenever it does end. We'll move on now to the Steelers. Oh my gosh. So much going on with the black and gold. The con artist back at it again early in free agency this year. Note heavy show. I'll read everything that has happened in terms of new acquisitions. Dante Jackson and a 6th for Deontay Johnson and a 7th. We'll touch on that in a moment. Deshaun Elliott he's defensive back formerly in Miami, played with the Ravens too, and I know there was a team in the middle that I'm blanking on right now. He's 26, I believe. They just inked him to a 2-year deal to help the secondary even more so. They get some inside linebacker help within the AFC North, bringing in Patrick Queen. So maybe gone are the days of Blake Martinez, Miles Jack, and Quan Alexander. Quan Alexander, he's banged up. That's not entirely his fault, but maybe this can finally be that solid piece in the ILB slot they've been yearning for a while now. And then potentially the biggest one, our last episode came out early last week, as Nathan and I were talking about before we started recording this week. Uh, a week after we said the Steelers are out on bringing in a veteran quarterback that can challenge Pickett, they go out and sign Russell Wilson, of all people. So we can work our way down that ladder, Nate, starting with the Deontay Johnson deal. Felt like they could have got a little more. I know the Panthers are kind of in a state of disarray, and maybe they just said, "Here, you don't want to be here. You can go to Carolina and see how well you like it there." Felt like they could have got a little more here. From again, we're kind of critical on Deontay on the show from time to time, but he is their WR1. They paid him like one and a sixth and a okay defense or cornerback, excuse me. Felt like there could have been a little more there.
Yeah, agreed. Especially with the state of their wide receiver corps to begin with.
That's the big thing. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure. I mean, potentially, you never know what's said amongst those calls, but I'm sure, the Carolina Panthers front office is saying, "Hey, remember all those times he dropped the ball? Remember that fumble he didn't go after? We're not giving that much up for him." I mean, Deontay's obviously can slot in as a number one, but he's been a liability at times. He hasn't been a true number one. I mean, he'd be a really good number two at a lot of places, but
Mhm.
Carolina's just a spot where he's going to have to be the number one or on the verge of a number one. So that's why, I mean, it is surprising the Steelers didn't get a little bit more, maybe a little bit of a higher pick. Um, but Dante Jackson's going to come in, slot across from JPJ as of now, unless they pick someone up or draft someone or whatever the case may be. His contract's a little lofty, though. I was reading Alan Saunders' piece, on trying to restructure his contract. He's the 63rd ranked cornerback on PFF, but the 17th highest paid cornerback in the league. So that's just like he's getting, he's getting bang for his buck, though. I mean, he's an average corner getting, above average pay. But yeah, I mean, felt like the Steelers could have gotten more if maybe he can slot in and do something. I mean, maybe he could be actually a viable starter and reasonable and not really a liability, but we'll see. I mean, Levi Wallace struggled this year. Patrick Peterson obviously had to be moved to safety because he couldn't, fit in at the corner any longer. So we'll have to see. I mean, a lot of these signings and trades and whatnot, it's always a waiting game. And I know we'll talk about like the Guentzel trade in a little bit. I mean, the same thing. Like you can say all you want about the return, but you never know until it actually happens. Obviously, Jackson's, what he's done so far in the NFL hasn't been anything great or spectacular. So, yeah, the Steelers could have probably gone a little bit better in a trade return, but hey, Deontay, I mean, he just didn't live up to the standards that the Steelers really wanted out of a number one. And now, we were joking about in the chat, George Pickens, your number one. Obviously, there's going to be someone signed or a couple or someone drafted. So he is your number one as of now and probably will be going in unless they do somehow land a big name. I know Michael Thomas, I think, just went on the market. Tyler Boyd's out there, obviously, but he'd be more of a, if not tied as a number one, number two guy. I mean, he's not going to be your number one guy in Pittsburgh, but yeah, I mean, Deontay, that's a big one to move, especially with where the Steelers are at right now. I mean, they're not going to be contenders, but they do need someone in the receiving room.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about last week this pending Johnson deal because it came out that they were open to moving him. And I brought up the fact that I didn't like the idea of, regardless of the role Allen Robinson had, I didn't like the thought of them ditching him and Deontay Johnson. But the other missing piece is someone who had several spectacular catches on the Steelers and, set a new bar for what a black and gold wide receiver should be. And that's Miles Boykin, who's also gone, also a free agent this year. I'm joking, obviously. But this Steelers receiving core now, you're kind of looking around the room going, huh? Yeah, Calvin Austin and George Pickens leading the charge. George Pickens, again, to bring up what I mentioned last week, prior to that really big game he had against the Bengals, they were so worried about his attitude. People online were calling for them to sit him for a while to prove a point. This is a team that's notoriously had some wide receiver ego issues, and now you're banking on him to be your WR1. I'm sure they're going to go heavy in the draft on wide receiver. It seems like they've addressed, a lot of these defensive needs already through free agency. So I'm assuming they're targeting a wide receiver that they really like early on in this draft. Okay, that's fine. You look at the wide receiver free agents, Nate, as you mentioned, and there's some interesting routes they can go. Curtis Samuel just signed with the Bills. He was one of those big names who maybe can, really start to gel in Pittsburgh potentially. There's been some talk about Tyler Boyd coming back to his hometown team, which I think is, I'm not an insider, obviously. I know I look like one, but, you know, I think that's probably what might have the biggest likelihood of happening. But after that, I mean, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham Jr., older, they bring some veteran experience, but does it, what kind of version of them are you getting? OBJ's got some injury issues, as does Michael Thomas, who, there have been some off field things brought up with Michael Thomas as of late, too. There's not a ton here that really jumps out to me. I kind of like Josh Reynolds from Detroit too. Is that a likely thing? I haven't really heard much about that. Valdez Scantling, no. Um, but I don't know. Mike Williams and Reynolds are two guys I'd like them to get if they don't go the Tyler Boyd direction. But other than that, man, I'm really not sure what you're going to do in terms of supplementing that receiving core with someone who's already kind of experienced and can bring that veteran receiving role on this team. And hopefully they don't do what they've done in the past, and that's get over the hill guys. Hello, Jericho Cotchery, and do that route of things. But I don't know. There's a lot to be determined with this receiving core. And, Omar Khan, I think, has done a pretty solid job. He hasn't done a ton where I've said, what the hell is he doing? He's going out there spending money on guys like Patrick Queen, who we'll talk about in a minute. And so far this offseason, they haven't really gone after some over the hill guy who's kind of a big name and gone, oh, look, we did this. Hi, Patrick Peterson. So, we'll see. We'll see what's happening. It looks like he's kind of got the right idea in terms of getting guys in their mid 20s who were established. That first deal's kind of ending maybe, and now they're pouncing on them and going to see what they can do in Pittsburgh. But we'll keep it in the defensive backfield here. DB Deshaun Elliott, mentioned him earlier, coming over, going to replace Keanu Neal from the sounds of it. That's his anticipated role. A few people on Twitter that cover the Steelers, Chris Carter, I believe maybe Alan Saunders, second name drop of him in this episode already. But sounds like the idea of bringing Elliott in is now they have some more freedom to move Minka around, maybe have him at that center field air quote position that they like him to be in, that they really couldn't use him in last year. Because as you mentioned, they were moving everybody and their grandmother around, their mother, brother, grandmother, hate me in that order. Wow, I thought Nate would laugh a little harder at that. But
No,
anyway,
I get it.
thank you. It's always dangerous quoting Kanye West.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
That was dangerous. Don't think that means I stand for anything he stands for. Please don't. But yeah, I mean, this was a secondary who was just throwing random crap at the wall and seeing what sticks. So hopefully by bringing in Elliott, they do have that freedom to put Minka in that roaming position where he can make some impact plays, because it felt like last season, the most notable thing Minka did was be involved in that hit that destroyed Nick Chubb's leg. And I'm not saying that in a good way. I'm saying that's kind of when you think of Minka Fitzpatrick in 2023 in terms of big plays, that's the play my mind goes to, which is incredibly unfortunate. So hopefully there's something in these signings that gives Minka that freedom. And I've said that 3 times now, which means it's time for Nate to talk.
Yeah, I don't have a ton on Elliott because I saw the reports today, and I didn't know for sure if like it was official. Because I also knew like I saw people throwing around the name of Simmons from Denver. What it would be like to get him paired up with Minka, but either way, they filled a hole that they need to be. Obviously, they're going to look for depth now, but yeah, I mean, it seems like again, it's kind of with the Dante Jackson situation. Elliott's a guy that not a high level player, but he's someone that's going to start for your team. And obviously lug a lot of minutes, a lot of snaps back there with Minka. So
Yeah, it sounds like he's not going to be a turnover machine by any means, but he'll get involved, get in on the plays. And the big thing, again, if he can help Minka be Minka, that's huge in of itself. But potentially the biggest signing from this defensive side of the ball is Patrick Queen coming in. Again, as I've alluded to, kind of touched on earlier, this is that inside linebacker that they hope can be the anchor at the position. They've had injuries, they've had guys that didn't pan out. Hi, Kevin Bush. Enjoy your, or excuse me, Devin Bush. Sorry. Enjoy your time in Cleveland. Insults don't work when you stutter like that. But yeah, this should hopefully really give that inside linebacker position an identity now. And I've liked what I've seen from him. It seems like this has pretty much been universally applauded by the media, both nationally and regionally. So this could be a big impact signing now with, Highsmith and Watt out there too. Now you have that centerpiece of that linebacking core. This could be really interesting.
yeah, I think what Shazier was in the inside, correct? When
And
he
they've
was here,
struggled to fill that ever since.
exactly, and that's exactly where I was going for that. So thank you for picking me up on that because you know a strong word to use here, but I kind of love this signing. You
Mhm.
get you get a guy that comes obviously from a rival, but he's a hard nosed guy, but also he can make plays. Like I mean, he's going to help your run defense a lot. And obviously, the Steelers have really struggled in the past couple of years, especially up the middle there. And as you mentioned, with Highsmith and Watt on the outside, and with potentially Landon Roberts starting in the middle there as well. It's a really solid core. The only thing is, like, now here you go again. You have a high paid defense. They have to live up to that standard. What Queen's contract is the highest free agent contract the Steelers have ever dished out, right?
I think I read that.
Yeah. So I mean, it's obviously there's a lot on Patrick Queen's shoulders to come in and help fix that middle of the defense. Um, but the Steelers, I mean, when you're throwing around money like that, you have to play at a high level. They've been really good at taking the ball away, but they just when it comes to yardage, I mean, that's been obviously a huge struggle. And I mean, just the thought of him coming over from the Ravens, obviously a rivalry type team. I mean, those two matchups, and also when you play your other two teams in in the division, and the Ravens and the Browns and the Bengals. There we go. Like to have that familiarity with those teams. I mean, that's huge. I know obviously Cincinnati's changing some things up at running back. Things are changing a lot. I mean, it's very, very active free agency, and the Steelers, for the first time, and it seems like a long time, are very active themselves and picking up some big names, whether or not they're over the hill, as in I'm sure we'll talk about Russ in a second. But I mean Patrick Queen, I mean, huge addition, I think, to that defense.
Yeah, that's nail on the head. I don't think you could understate how important that signing could be if he does end up panning out. But as we've mentioned, you get a little worried hearing about them going all in on an ILB like that. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, we've reached what you might have clicked on the video for. I'm actually going to write that down so I could timestamp this in case anyone wants to jump right in to the Russell Wilson discourse here. But yes, it happened. The Steelers went out and signed a veteran quarterback. It was not Ryan Tannehill. It wasn't Justin Fields. They went out and they brought in Danger Russ Wilson. And Russell Wilson has been one of my favorite players in the league basically since he got here. And I tweeted it. I really doubt many people saw it, but I tweeted it. It was out there right when it happened. This is really cool for me. A favorite player of mine coming to play an integral role, hopefully, on my favorite team. Is he over the hill a bit? Sure. But he's probably better than Kenny Pickett right now. I'd bet a lot of money that he's better than Kenny Pickett right now. This is real competition for Kenny, and I'm operating under the mindset that Russell is going to be starting week 1 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And whether they consider this Kenny learns from an actually experienced Super Bowl champion veteran quarterback on a 1-year loaner, and then Kenny gets another shot or whatever, I don't care. I love this right now because I think Pittsburgh is a few pieces away from being there. And they've done a great job addressing the defense. We'll see what they do with their O line. We'll see what they do with that receiver core. As I said, there's some changes being made, and I've liked a lot of what I've seen. And now you have that veteran presence under center who can help this team. When this signing first happened, sorry, Nate, I'll wrap this up quickly so you can start. When this signing first got announced, obviously there were people clowning on it, saying if you weren't there with us when we were 10-7, don't be there for us when we're 8-1, and all that clever stuff. Whatever. Russell Wilson in his first year at Denver, 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. There's the guy on TikTok saying, is he going to throw for more touchdowns than he has bathrooms in his houses? Okay. And I think that's what people are imagining when they say Russell Wilson. They're not thinking of last year. He had 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and completed almost 67% of his passes. And you can say, oh, that's only because of Sean Payton, whatever. We'll see what happens. We will see what happens, but I think Russell has a lot more left in the tank. Is he what he was? No. To quote Toby Keith, he ain't as good as he once was, all right? But I think, A, he's much better than Kenny Pickett, and B, he's still got a good chunk of gas in that tank right now.
Nick, well said for everything there. I mean, with the available quarterbacks on the market, you're telling me that Russell Wilson isn't the best option out there, the Tannehills, the Kirk Cousins. Like, what have they done in their NFL career that makes them more valuable than Russell Wilson? Yes, we talk about. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say Kirk Cousins, you can love him, and he's the Cole's dad and all that, whatnot. Don't forget all of the chatter about how he has a horrendous record on primetime games. And all those
Absolutely.
other big game stats surrounding Kirk Cousins. I'm not going to say that's the be-all, end-all for what you should consider, but just think of who you're fighting for there when you say something like that.
And again, I mean, this team isn't going to go and make the AFC Championship game. They're not. I mean, that's just not how it is. But there's a better chance for them to at least win a playoff game, because that should be the goal. That should be the damn goal this year, is to win a playoff game. And with the signings that they've started to bring in, obviously a lot of things still to be shored up your center, as we talked about, and your receiving core. But Russell Wilson to come in and at least lead this offense can do it much better than what Kenny Pickett has done. And you don't even have, and Russell Wilson might not even throw more than 10 touchdowns. He might not. But as long as he can go out there and make the simple plays, dump the ball off and not miss Deontay Johnson or George Pickens in stride that's wide open, at least move the ball downfield and score in the red zone, especially because, with Arthur Smith, you're going to run the ball a good bit. You're going to use your tight end. So, again, we don't even know what the receiver core. You might not need a whole lot at the receiver core, because they're going to spread the ball in terms of tight ends and run the ball a lot. And you can throw to Jalen Warren and Najee Harris out of the backfield. But Russell Wilson gives you the chance to have an improved offense. You're going to have a new coordinator in there. You're going to have a new quarterback. And again, on the loaner deal. So who knows if Russ comes back after this year. But 1 year, I mean, he probably can turn an dysfunctional offense into at least a well-oiled machine. Obviously not a top-tier, lethal offense like some of the other teams, in the NFL, but at least move the ball downfield and give you hope. Because it seemed like every time Kenny stepped out on that field after week 1 or 2 last year, it was like, oh boy, is he going to miss someone? Is he going to throw an interception? Which he didn't. He really didn't do that much. He didn't turn the ball over, which is the good thing going. But then the other thing is Russell Wilson comes in. He's a veteran. He can teach Kenny Pickett. But here's the other thing is Kenny Pickett's going to be 26 to start this year. Like, that's getting pretty old for a young quarterback who's in his 3rd year. I mean, how much more does he have to learn? I mean, I think we talked a couple of weeks ago just about, how really bad Kenny has really looked and doesn't pass the eye test anymore. And obviously the stats speak for themselves, just the numbers, how poorly they've been. But just watching him, it's not what you want from a starting quarterback. And I think Wilson's, a good fit. Obviously, you're getting him for so cheap. I mean, your quarterback room is what, $4 million combined as of now. and Mason Rudolph's off getting a $3 million contract, and Mitch Trubisky's getting a $3 million contract. Like, I mean, I think you're saving the money to at least add some more pieces around, and then you go from there after this year. And at
Mhm.
least if Wilson's gone, you can at least have him teach Kenny a little bit because Kenny's still on contract one more year after next. Um, so I think it's a really good signing for the Steelers, the best option I think possible. I don't care what he did in Denver. He still put up some actually respectable number, 26 touchdowns last year. Um, Super Bowl winning quarterback. I just don't know where all the slander is coming from. I get it. He's older, but like, I don't get it. I don't get where a lot of the slander is coming from.
He's older. He's corny. He had a really bad year his first year in Denver. I get it, but this is a guy who is a dynamic player still. He has great playmaking ability, and I think that's what excites me the most. He was 8th in quarterback rushing last year. I know that's not a crazy stat, but he still can use his legs and use them effectively. His deep ball's pretty good. He only threw one interception on a deep ball last year. But something I zeroed in on when kind of looking at Russell Wilson, because I knew I was going to come out here and just sing his praises like we're at Mass on a Sunday morning, his red zone efficiency. Pittsburgh was 25th in red zone scoring last year. Russell Wilson had 26 touchdowns passing last season. 20 of them came in the red zone. He had another 3 rushing. If they can get into the red zone and actually score a damn touchdown, you're not going to believe this, but they might win a few more ball games if they can actually do that effectively. You got 3 giant tight ends. You have Pat Fryermuth, you have Darnell Washington, you have Connor Hayward, you have Arthur Smith, who loves to run the ball. We're going to utilize those tight ends. I'm excited to see what happens when Pittsburgh gets down in the red zone. And I know they have to get there, first of all. And with only 2 wide receivers on the roster that are actually, established, that might be a little difficult, but I'm sure they'll address that. But no, I'm excited to see what he brings to this offense from the red zone side of things, too.
I mean, maybe we're being overly optimistic, but why not? From a year that this year was just, I mean, you were pulling your hair watching that offense. And then now you add obviously some pieces on the defense, which it's still, we're not sure what's going to happen back there, but Patrick Queen, obviously a really nice addition. I mean, you put those two together. I mean, you have a solid football team that, again, the AFC North, yeah, the Ravens are probably your number one, but it really is a bloodbath every single year. It just is. And the Steelers, I mean, they split, and I don't know where I don't know who it was. Some national guy on the radio. I saw a clip of him. You might have seen it, Nick, talking about how the Steelers are doomed when they play the Ravens with Derrick Henry going in there and being signed. That the Steelers have no shot. But let's not forget that they're 8-1 against the Ravens, or 7-1, whatever it is over the last 3-4 seasons. It is. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's. I mean, obviously it's going to be a tough division, but it's anyone's game, really, in the AFC North. It just is every single year. And the Steelers are building up very nicely. Omar Khan, again, I mean, he's really doing a nice job. And now it comes down to the draft and what they can do and see if they can add any other receivers.
Yeah, I'm sure 10 minutes after this episode goes out, they'll finalize the receiver deal, but just know no one was signed as we record this. But anyway, we knew we were going to talk about him a lot, but this might end one of our longest offseason storylines, which is us debating who's going to be under center, who's going to compete with Kenny. It seems like now that storyline might be wrapped up. We'll see what rookie they presumably draft to close things out, and we'll go from there. But yeah, now the storyline's Russell Wilson versus Kenny Pickett, I guess, which if you told me that a month ago, I would have said, what the hell's going on in Pittsburgh? I'm still saying that, and it actually happened. But yeah, new twist on this storyline to see what's going on down there. But anyway, it's time to finally address the Penguins. We're going long tonight, man. We're at 34 minutes. We haven't even started on the Pens yet. Luckily, I'm not going to have much to say. But something in the orange tells me my co-host might. That's right. I saw where you were this weekend. But
Attaboy.
yeah, I follow the Snapchats
I was
closely. I
I
mark.
was I was waiting for it. I knew you were gonna say something too. You
I
you
was
you're
jealous.
you're very observant, and I love that.
I was very jealous. That's not me being cynical. I was just jealous of you
No,
for being at Zach Bryan. I love that guy. His music. He did cheat on his wife, I'm pretty sure. So I don't love that part. But
and Here, I'll tell a quick story about the concert. I don't know if it might have been on TikTok or something, and
Did you
maybe
see
it's
them
one on Twitter.
stealing the Yager bobbleheads
No,
while
I
you
did
were at the
not,
concert? No?
unfortunately. But his one of his main guitarists slash banjo player. I don't know his name because I'm not. I mean, I listened to him a little bit. My girlfriend's really into him, so we got some tickets and we got down there. Um, During the concert, Zach Bryan's telling a story about this guy, one of his bandmates, that he used to work at PPG Paints Arena for 10 years as the penalty
Wow.
box the penalty box attendant. And while they're talking about, they show these pictures up on the screen. It was awesome. Like this guy like worked, and he had his jacket that said NHL on it, and he used to work there. It was awesome. And then they came out for the encore, and he put on a Crosby jersey. So that was pretty sick to see
That's
that.
nuts. That's so cool. That's like I love those stories of musicians actually getting big or like their touring musicians blow up
Mhm.
because until you have blown up, you aren't making a living doing that.
Yeah. It was
That's
cool.
awesome.
It was sweet, and even when they said he was from Pittsburgh, just in general, because he's from Pittsburgh, it was awesome to hear that. And then they go along with, you're at PPG Paints Arena, you hear that story. It was sweet.
Yeah, that's sick. That's a good nugget, as a former mentor of ours would say. It's a good little nugget there, Nate. But unfortunately, we're gonna bring the mood back down. Jake Guentzel officially dealt, which luckily for all of you means you don't have to hear me ask Nate it worded a different way every single week. But you mentioned the return earlier. What did you make of the deal? And then I'll just throw everything at you at once here. Are you surprised Mike Sullivan's still the head coach of this hockey team?
Um, it's been a rough year. I was listening to I'll address like the Sullivan stuff first. I was listening to Phil Bork was on with Mark Madden on 105.9, and he was fired up about how soft the Penguins have been this year, and that's the one thing that's really bugged him about this year, which is true until John Ludwig started fighting people the last week and a half. The Penguins have been just pretty soft this year, and not a lot of guys getting to the front of the net, which we talked about early in the season. I mean, the amount of shots they're getting on net, but like no one's there to put in a rebound like an old Patrick Hornquist would have done. Um, I I know it's pretty common that the Penguins have fired coaches in the middle of the season, but also mind you that it's a new ownership group, it's a new GM, so maybe they didn't want to do that. Um, he could well be on the way out the door because as we're sitting here now, as we're recording this, they're losing to the Sharks 2-1 at the end of the first period. But also the Penguins, if you take a peek at the standings, the Penguins aren't out of it per se. They're 65 points, and the Islanders and the Red Wings completely fell off. They were pretty comfortably in the second wild card, and then they lost. Now the Islanders jumped in there 72 points. So it's a 7-point differential, but the Penguins aren't playing like they want to be in the playoffs. So obviously there's
Mhm.
something to be said about that with Mike Sullivan, and it could also be something to be said about just for the first time and forever, they're sellers. And Sidney Crosby and what's it impacted his psyche, and Malkin and Letang. Letang doesn't even look like himself the last 2 weeks. He's fallen over thin air. He looks awful. He's turning over pucks like it's no one's business. Like it's unbelievable the way they're playing. Um, but to tie that back into the whole Guentzel trade, I mean, it just seems like ever since that was sort of thought about a week before the deadline, the Penguins have just really hit this rock bottom. And it's crazy to think that they're still kind of in the mix. And if really they win a couple games in a row, who knows where they're at in 2 weeks? I mean, there's still
Mhm.
20 games to be played, or whatever it may be. But the Gensel deal, to touch on that, they could have gotten a better prospect out of the Hurricanes, but it just seemed like for a guy that's a rental, no one in the NHL really wanted to pay highly for someone like that this year, especially if he doesn't resign there. And it wasn't like it was a trade and sign or sign and trade. Like he didn't get an extension upon being traded there. So who knows like where he's going to be come the summer. If he signs there or if he who knows circles back to the Pens. You never know because he obviously loved it here. Um, and Crosby loved playing with him. And Crosby has a little bit of say.
Just a
Um,
tad.
Yeah, and what could happen, I've heard that, like, he doesn't really use it, but, like, he's respected enough that he could have a say, like your LeBron James of the world. Um, I like Michael Bunting. Like, I think he could bring a good he's a good piece to be there. He could be a good second line player. I'm not sure if he would be the perfect top line left winger. Um, but I think he's a solid guy. He's scrappy. He'll get his nose dirty. That's how he scored against the Senators the other night for his first goal of the year, or first goal with the Penguins. And then in terms of the prospects, it seems like some guys that are gonna play could potentially play third, fourth line minutes. Vasily Kuvinin, I don't even know if I'm saying these right, so bear with me. Or Vili Kuvinin, and then Vasily Ponomarov, who's in the AHL right now. That could be a guy who could come up maybe by the end of the year, or we'll see him in training camp next year. Some guys that are fringe players, basically in the NHL, and then you have this Cruz Lucius guy. Um, that's at Wisconsin. He seems like he could be a good playmaker, but again, there's not any like bona fide guys that'll be in the lineup come next year. So a little bit disappointing on the return for sure. But it just seemed like no one wanted to really pay it. I mean, Vancouver wanted Guentzel, but they were out of the running pretty early. Um, Seemed like it was like the Rangers were coming down there at the end. Could potentially, I saw something that Capo Caco could potentially come to the Pens, which would have been a nice return, I think. I mean, him and Bunting probably a little interchangeable, but Caco's younger. He's got some, I think, untouched skill you can have on your team. But yeah, just a handful of prospects. His first round pick is a conditional first round pick and changes if the Hurricanes don't go to the Stanley Cup Finals or whatever it is, which it would be a 31st or 32nd overall pick anyways. So it's not like you're losing a whole lot. Um, so a little bit underwhelming, but that's just what it was, I think, for this year's deadline.
Mhm. At least he didn't go to the Rangers. That started circling the Twitter circles, and that would've been a dagger. That'd been a
Yeah,
dagger through the heart.
yeah. And the other thing, I'm really curious to see how he does in Carolina. Obviously, it's his first stop away from Pittsburgh. Like, what happens? What happens if he's snake bitten? Because you see that so much in guys who are dealt. Um, Like, when Derek Brassard came here or Jerome McGinley came to Pittsburgh, both of those guys, like, were really hot going in and big commodities at the deadline, and then all of a sudden, they really didn't do a whole lot. So, who knows? Guentzel could be homesick and just not play well at Carolina, but it's a good team. I mean, they're gonna make a good run, I think, in the playoffs this year, but and Guentzel could be a huge part of it or not. We'll see.
Absolutely. The big crime of the week, maybe bigger than the Gensel story, was that Yarmir Yager bobblehead night was ruined when they were all stolen in California. They filmed their little promo video of Yager saying, "Let's go find your friends," with one of the bobbleheads in the passenger seat of the car. Was this a gimmick? Were they actually stolen by the Wet Bandits? I'm not sure. But one thing is for sure, and that's people are talking about the Penguins, and it's not about Jake Gensel, which maybe they just wanted it out of this mainstream sports media. So they planted some thieves in Cali there and told them to steal the bobbleheads. I don't think that happened, but another blemish on what's been a hell of a year for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, what an odd story, and I think you know, I saw the post when I was out and about this morning. I saw that and I was like, "What the heck? Like, how is that possible?" You got people coming in from out of town and whatnot, coming to see this game, and now they're not going to be able to get their bobbleheads handed to them. Obviously, they still can get them. So I don't know. You know, it's kind of sad and pathetic that this happened in the first place. Um, and a funny story on top of that, but I thought it was really weird. So they posted that story, the video of Yager, as you mentioned, getting in the truck, which I thought was really cool, good twist, because obviously the Penguins had to have known that this shipment wasn't coming in probably a day or two ago. So they probably filmed that video either this morning or yesterday, knowing that like, hey, we need to have something to at least like cushion this fall. But I don't know if you watch. There's I don't know what it's called. The ESPN NHL show that they do, the sit down, um, and studio show, and they had Brooke Pryor on, the Steelers beat reporter for
Mm.
ESPN,
I
and
saw her tweet this. I didn't watch the clip
it
though.
was go and watch the clip at some point. It was the goofiest and the dumbest thing I think I've ever seen. The guy, again, I've never watched this before. It was the first time it came on after the Pitt game on ESPN2. Um, the guy's asking her questions about it, and it's just like all satire. She's like, "Oh well, according to law enforcement, they saw a guy with orange fur driving back across the PA Turnpike towards Philadelphia with the shipment of bobbleheads. And I'm like, well, obviously, because they're joking around about Gritty and whatnot. Because I mean, he's the punching bag of mascots. Um, and I'm like, okay, so is this did this really happen that like this shipment got lost in California? Or is this all a joke and like fans are gonna go and get their bobbleheads at the game? Like I didn't know
which
what was
hasn't
going.
happened yet.
Which I'm just like, what the hell is going on? Like this, you got to go watch it. It was a bizarre interview, if you can find it, and it wasn't funny. Like I did not find it funny, and I know it was a little skit, but it was just I don't know. But the whole thing with the bobbleheads, oh, it just sums up the Penn season, doesn't it?
It sure does, Nate. It sure does. Maybe, just maybe, the Pirates, maybe it's their time to shine. Just maybe. If that is the case, I don't think Rowanzi Contreras is going to be a big part of that. But before we dive into his stat line, Penguins Talk is always brought to you by Pure Hockey, NHL gear, NHL apparel. Anything you need in the world of hockey, Pure Hockey's got it. Thanks for sponsoring the show. More from them in the description below. Anyway, Rowanzi Contreras, oh boy. Yesterday, Wednesday, 4 innings pitched, 2 hits, 4 earned runs. And you're saying, how the hell did he give up 2 hits and allow 4 runs? Well, 6 walks will do that to you. Control a major issue, not bouncing back the way you want him to after what's already been a shaky spring. He's definitely out of the running, in my opinion, for a starting rotation spot. That there are 2 open slots left still. He's out. He's out. I don't know if they can even keep him in the bullpen. He might be cut loose. I'm not sure how contractually all that's going to work out, but he's in a bad way right now. I'm not sure what they can justify doing in terms of giving him a chance. I guess long reliever and hope it works out. I really don't think they're just going to drop him for nothing. But then again, what value does he offer at this point? But on the bright side, Marco Gonzalez had his best spring outing today. 5 innings pitched, 1 hit, 1 run, 4 strikeouts. Did give up a long ball, but oh well. Good solid outing from him today. Also, big prospect matchup today. For the second time, they didn't bother to put the first time on TV. Paul Skeens of the Pirates and Jackson Holliday of the Orioles facing off a few moments ago, or hours ago, or days ago, depending on when you listen to this. Paul Skeens rung him up, struck him out, got really amped about it. He's touched 100 miles an hour plus 3 times already that I've seen just checking my phone briefly because I knew this was probably going to be going down while we were recording. So that's pretty cool to see. What also is pretty reassuring is this competition for those starting pitching slots, Nate. Jared Jones blossoming, Chase Anderson doing pretty well. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But everyone's kind of up in their competition, see what they can do, trying to fight for those last 2 slots in the starting rotation. And it's given Pirates fans, I think, something to grab onto here. I think that was kind of a, oh boy, who are we going to have to pluck in there? But some of these guys have really stepped up, and it's been good to see, especially from Jared Jones, who I don't think many people, despite him being, I think, their number 3 prospect, I don't think many people expected him to really make a strong case. But he's done that and more, so that's good to see. What's also great to see is that O'Neal Cruz, 5 homers already. I know there's a lot of, oh boy, he just shattered his ankle last year. Is he going to take that step this year? Is this going to be a year of him just kind of getting reacclimated, getting back into the swing of things? Pun might have been intended there. But he's leading the MLB, at least as of yesterday. Not sure who hit home runs in today's action, but leading the league in home runs in spring training, helping the Pirates lead the league in home runs in spring training. They need some power in that lineup. He's stepped up to the plate, as is Henry Davis, who's hit 4, which is great to see. Paul Skeens isn't going to start the year in the majors. I don't know why people thought that was going to be a thing. This is a guy who spent a cup of coffee even in the organization last year, barely did anything with Altoona. I think he's going to start there. Don't quote me on that, but I see nothing wrong with them throwing him in Altoona for a couple starts, then bumping him up to Indy. I don't see any harm in that. I would rather him work his way up there and really prove what he can do, get settled, before you throw him into the shark tank and just let him live and die by the sword, I guess, and get rattled off of and just say, "Oh, it's growing pains." But yeah, I don't know why that was as big of a deal as it was. I think him starting in the minors is fine. It should have been expected. And I'd rather them do that than have his confidence shattered with a few bad major league outings right away. Anything you wanted to touch on there, Nate? I know I threw a lot at you, but I've kind of gone long tonight, so I figured I'd just spitball everything I had on my mind there.
No, I'm glad you're carrying this, but this is obviously the time of year you weed out the players that just aren't going to cut it. And obviously, it's a disappointing thing about Rawanzi. I mean, obviously had some good expectations for him, but he just hasn't lived up to that standard. But Jared Jones and Skeens, I mean, got to be excited about those guys. And I'd love to see Skeens sooner rather than later. I mean, of course, as you said, Nick. I mean, he absolutely has to start down in the minors. You don't want to throw him in and potentially screw up some of his development. But it seems like he could very soon be ready for that, if not potentially be ready to go right now if you really wanted to throw him in the league. But obviously, let him start, get some starts down in the minors. But I think the biggest storyline, I mean, there's a lot to talk about the pitching, but really got to be excited. And it's a small sample size, but about the power hitting right now. I
Hmm.
mean, the Pirates leading spring training in home runs by a couple. Like not even like they're just tied amongst a bunch of teams. I mean, 35. I think the next closest is what 30. I think it was. Um, yeah, 30. Baltimore, of course, who they're playing. But it's a a very good thing to see. I mean, it gives you some hope of potentially what could happen, especially O'Neal Cruz if he can lift some balls over the Clemente wall. I mean that's going to be huge, and I think if the Pirates don't lose O'Neal last year, they could have been much closer to competing than people thought they probably could have been. And they're making that next step up. Obviously, they're wrong this year in terms of fighting for an NL Central spot and a wild card spot. And O'Neal Cruz is going to be a massive part of that. Because if you can have guys like O'Neal Cruz and Brian Hayes and Brian Reynolds not have all the weight on their shoulders, that's huge. Because
Hmm.
if you can spread the wealth around, and also Henry Davis, I mean, he's in there hitting a couple homers, and I think he's probably going to start in the majors this year, even though a week or two ago we talked about he might not because Yasmani Grandal is dealing with a foot injury. So no one knows what the timetable is on him to get ready to play. So Henry Davis looks like he could be in the starting lineup or at least on the roster for opening day. But I think it's a really positive thing right now. And again, it's spring training. I mean, you take it with a grain of salt, but you got to love it. And hopefully, I mean, things can translate over to the major league ballpark.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of guys on this team who are probably going to be in that ballpark of 10-ish home runs or whatever. So if they can get a guy like Davis, they can get a guy like Cruz to hit that 30, 20 plus 25 mark. I think that's going to be super beneficial. You got Telez come in. He's going to, he's there for his power. I don't think they're bringing in Telez to be an average hitter. So he's going to have that occasional pop. Kutch, assuming he's healthy, he'll hit 10 to 15. You got to think on the low end 10. Think 15 to 20 is not out of the realm of possibility for him. You got Jack Sawinski, who's probably not going to be an everyday guy, but he's a guy with a lot of pop too when he does make contact. So I think they'll be able to piece a pretty decent home run total this year. And if they have some of these guys carry this momentum over from the spring, I think this could be a team that I don't want to say relies on the long ball, but I think they're going to definitely shoot up the rankings because I think last year they were 28th in home runs or something in that area. They can definitely climb up that total and move up the ladder uh, with all these guys maybe exceeding expectations in a way.
And if you look at, I just jotted down real quick. I mean, just thinking about what potentially could that opening day batting lineup be like. And obviously, this is just random, not set in stone because you don't know who's going to lead off. But you think about Brian Hayes, number one, Reynolds, two. Then you have Cruz probably batting third. And then you have Telez, Sawinski, Davis, and McCutcheon all as options for 4, 5, 6, all in that
Mm.
range. And that's not even talking about Pagero or anybody else. I mean, that's a pretty solid, batting order through about your number 6 hole. I mean, that's something, to keep an eye on, again, you don't put all the weight on one guy's shoulder. You actually have you can spread it out a little bit. you know, in a game where, okay, Brian Hayes is 0 for 4, but then you have O'Neal Cruz is 2 for 4 with a home run. Like, it's just nice to see that you can have different pieces stepping up and not have to worry on one or two singular guys.
I'm starting to buy in that they might be an actual playoff contender this year. Not saying they're like a division series, championship series guarantee, but I think they can make a run at that wild card spot. I'm interested to see how close they get to either massively disappointing me or maybe exceeding or meeting those expectations. But that's a story for another day. The story right now is that it's time for the last call. Me and my good friend Nate giving our final thoughts before we leave you for a week and then see if Ethan Morrison finally has the gonads to join us for an episode. But Nate, what do you got for us?
Well, I'm taking a peek at an article right now that I saw earlier today come across my timeline, my feed on Twitter or X or whatever you would like to call it, the Bird app, about the college football playoff already ready to expand it to 14 teams instead of just the 12 that they would like to expand it to. And here's my gripe with this. I love the idea of expansion, expanding the playoff, getting more teams in there, and I really really love the idea of having a first round home game. I think that's going to be awesome if that comes to be, for sure. Um, but 14 teams, that's where you're starting to push the limit a little bit. I know that's how, what is it, the FCS does it. I don't know how many teams they have in their postseason tournament, um, but from where it was just a decade ago, where you had two teams vying for that national championship, all the way to potentially 14 teams. I mean, how much is the regular season really going to mean now to these teams? Because now there's obviously so much to talk about in college football that has changed, but now you're looking at teams are most definitely going to schedule the easiest cupcakes that they possibly can, like Michigan already does. Sorry, Jack. But to get in to that 14 team field, like the regular season, like 70% of it, like the other 30% of it's not going to mean a whole lot. Obviously, you're going to have your big games, but the college football landscape has changed so drastically. And I think adding a handful more teams is just into a playoff is just, it's getting way beyond, what I think was wanted. And now you're just so far away from it, what it usually or originally was, which two teams, every game mattered during the regular season, like every single game. You lose, you're done. Like now you can get away with a game or two. There's not as much emphasis maybe on a couple of those early games. I think college football is definitely going into, something we're going to see in a couple of years that no one's going to even recognize, which is a little disappointing from, the glory days, you could say, of like the 2000s and, the early 2010s of the BCS football championship. Definitely, a lot's going on and a lot's going to change, and don't know if it's going to be for the better.
I'm actually just about to tweet this too because I think it's actually pretty clever. But I think what you're overlooking, Nate, and I'm not saying I totally disagree with you, but I think one big factor and benefit of them moving this to 14 teams is that there's going to be an argument to put Notre Dame in the playoff every single year now. And I think that's what you're being a little ignorant towards.
I just love how reading this article, it's literally like the college football playoff is on the brink of moving one important step closer to an expected 14-team playoff that would begin in 2026 as the 10 FBS conferences and Notre Dame are pushing to meet. And it's just like, it's so funny because it's like all the conferences and then Notre Dame.
I can't believe they haven't been forced to join the ACC yet. I cannot believe that. My last call is pretty simple. It's going to be under 10 words. Actually, maybe not. Probably under 20. Here we go. Mike Tyson and Jake Paul are going to have a boxing match live on Netflix. Why? We'll see you next week on Stranded in Pittsburgh. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you. If you've stuck around for the whole entire thing, comment Ethan smells like jelly in the comments down below. and we will see you next equally, if not more entertaining than this one. And if you don't believe that, then I guess you have to come and check it out for yourself. That's Nate. That's Nate. I'm Nick. We'll see you next time.